With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome to Heard Tell and welcome to Thursday. It is March the 17th, year of our Lord 2022. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you so much for joining us with the most precious thing you have, your time, and we're going to spend it on a couple of stories that need the noise of the news cycle turned down on them so we can get to some good information of our times. We're going to talk a little bit about the narrative going around on the right about how black voters are leaving the Democratic Party. Theodore Johnson has a piece out in The Bulwark. We're going to talk about that. He has facts and data to back up what he says. We'll delve into that and that very important voting demographic in both the midterms and the coming 2024 presidential election. Also, a story out of Albany about youth caregivers that we'll end the program with. Youth caregivers taking care of the elderly, taking care of the chronically ill, taking care of siblings, not talked about a lot. Very important, though, to family structures. It's been that way as long as there's been families, trying to maybe normalize them and get a better count on them. Talk about that in just a little bit. Also on the program today, our friend Jericho Hill is back, an economist. He's going to be talking about gas prices. We're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about the messaging of both the Democratic Party and President Biden and the Republicans that are trying to use it as a weapon. Who's got the better narrative? Who's got the better set of facts? We'll get into that with our friend Jericho Hill, along with a lot of other topics. Love having him on the program. But first, let's go back to Ukraine, as we've talked about just about every day for 3 weeks now. President Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who has become something of a folk hero. He's certainly been the leader that his country desperately needs in this dark hour of them suffering under a illegal Russian invasion and the war crimes that Vladimir Putin is putting upon his people and his country. He addressed Congress. I want you to hear some of the things he says. Now, he's pitching for a no-fly zone, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment. But he goes to this imagery. He said, "Friends, Americans," this is from WRAL.com. You can find these comments all over. "Friends, Americans, in your great history, you have pages that would allow you to understand Ukrainians, understand us now when we need you right now," he said through a translator. Quoting Zelensky, "Remember Pearl Harbor, terrible morning of December 7, when your sky was black from planes attacking you. Just remember it. Remember the September the 11th, a terrible day in 2001, when evil tried to turn U.S. cities into battlefields, when innocent people were attacked from the air just like nobody else expected, and you could not stop it. Our country experiences the same every day, right now, in this moment." Stirring words, stirring imaging, strong imagery. We talked to our friend Alice Watson Brown, and she talked about when she talked to the British Parliament, he used Churchill and Shakespeare, and he related very well. This man knows exactly what he's doing with PR. He knows to advocate for his country. So let me break this down for you this way. If I'm Volodymyr Zelensky, I'm doing exactly what he's doing. I'm begging for interference. I'm begging for military intervention. I'm begging for a no-fly zone. I'm taking anything I can get, help anywhere I can to help my people. If I'm a member of Congress or if I'm President Biden, I'm also doing exactly what they're already doing and not doing a no-fly zone. The no-fly zone is too often in the commentary at being whiffed around as some kind of a magical in-between step between peace and war. That's not what it is. It's a tool. And the only way a no-fly zone works is when the first plane goes in the no-fly zone, you shoot it down. So anytime somebody says they want a no-fly zone, the first question you ask them, are you prepared to shoot down a Russian aircraft, military aircraft, or probably a bunch of them, because they're not going to come by themselves. They're going to roll in there heavy and test your no-fly zone. Understand that's an act of war. We can talk about whatever the Russians have been doing in Ukraine. It's an illegal war. They're committing war crimes daily. But if we fire on a Russian jet, that is an act of war, and we will be at war. There's not any happy hunting ground here where we're not going to shoot down Russian planes and not get in a shooting war with Russia. Now, we could install a no-fly zone around everything around Ukraine that's already under control of NATO and say, don't cross this line or we will wax you. We did that in Syria, places like Al-Dazar, where the Mercs under Wagner, which is Russian-controlled, decided they wanted to test America, and they only got about half of them back to no U.S. casualties. We may be able to do that sort of thing. But keep very clear-eyed when people talk about a no-fly zone, including Volodymyr Zelensky. He knows what he's asking here. The first question you ask them when they say we should have a no-fly zone is, Are you prepared to shoot down a Russian aircraft, or probably 10 or 20 of them? Because that's what it's going to take to enforce a no-fly zone. And are you ready for the consequences of that? Understanding that that is an act of war by all definitions. You're either going to have to go to war with Russia and stop it, or you're not. There's no magical fairies and magical in-between steps where this thing's just going to stop on its own accord. Vladimir Putin doesn't want an off-ramp. He wants this war. Now, even if it's going badly for him and hurting him, he's still not going to be anywhere near ready to stop prosecuting it. And using flowery language and using make-believe things, like we're just going to slap a magical no-fly zone over Ukraine and that's going to stop all the bombing, isn't going to help anybody. And one more thing I want to bring up when it comes to Vladimir Zelensky. We've heard over and over again in America, we're going to hear it this year, we're going to hear it in 2 years in 2024. I suspect I'll hear it every election for the rest of my life. This is the most important, consequential election of our lifetime. Who would have thought that one of the really most consequential elections in our lifetime was Vladimir Zelensky? Barely got covered in the West. And when it was covered in the West, when he was elected to the presidency of the Ukraine, it was mostly of, hey, this actor became the president of a country. Ha ha, isn't that a cool little story? Which is true. And a lot of Western press missed the backstory. That if he didn't get elected in that election, Ukraine would already be like Belarus, a wholly owned subsidiary under Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko in Belarus cheated in his election and then crushed the uprising that tried to get him out of power when everybody knows he is illegally there and cheated in that election. They had a stooge in place. He was going to be very pro-Russia. He was going to basically make Ukraine a vassal state. He was going to continue the vast corruption that had racked Ukraine for years. And by the way, that corruption isn't all on the Ukrainians because a lot of it was Russian subversion trying to take over the country. So you can miss me with all that mess. We know there's corruption in the country. They still don't deserve to be invaded. But one of the most consequential of our lifetime elections turned out to be an actor in the Ukraine with a name most people couldn't pronounce before all this happened. And now here we are a couple of years later, comparing him to Churchill and other great war leaders. And he's addressing the U.S. Congress. And now nobody's laughing. And almost everybody's admiring him. Funny how things work out. We're not as smart as we think we are. And sometimes we get heroes in unlikely places. More Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. You know, one of the things we do here and we pride ourselves on is turning down the noise of the news cycle. And it doesn't matter which side or which ideology or which party is doing the noise. If there's noise, we want to get to the bottom of it and get to the good information to be had. We've done it about different demographic groups and voter groups. We've recently been talking a lot about the Latino voter groups and Hispanic voter groups. There's a great piece in The Bulwark from Theodore Johnson has written this, and he's taking on the concept that has been floating around for a while that black voters are leaving the Democratic Party. And he pushes back on it a little bit, and he has this kind of data. He says, and quoting from his piece at The Bulwark, Trump received just 6% of the black vote in 2016 and 8% in 2020. On average, from 1968 to 2004, Republican presidential nominees earned just over 11% of the black vote, which means not only did Trump underperform the party average in consecutive elections, but he also did worse twice than every single Republican nominee since the Voting Rights Act of 65, except for two, John McCain in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012. I would also throw in there that Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama, probably had a whole lot to do with that. John McCain was running against, you guessed it, Barack Obama, probably had a whole lot to do with it. And even then, with Trump facing a not incredibly popular Hillary Clinton in 2016, he could only match what Romney could muster against the historic second-term candidacy of Barack Obama. By the way, let's dispel another. There's never been a Republican alive in the last 40 years that was going to beat Barack Obama in that second election. It just was not going to happen. You can put away all your fan fiction regarding that. He was going to get reelected. Back to the piece. This should not inspire confidence in those Republicans who believe they are at the precipice of tent expansion. To put a finer point on it, what we are witnessing with black voters today is not an exit from the Democratic Party as much as a too much wokeness on the left and an appeal of Trumpism on the right. Rather, we are seeing black Republicans who chose to vote for the first black president or sat out the election or two so as not to vote against him, return to their voting habits now that Obama is no longer on the ballot. And it seems that a couple of percentage points worth of those pre-2008 Black Republican voters may have decided to ride it out with Democrats. How can I be so sure of this? This is Theodore Johnson writing in the Bulwark. Because few things have been as steady in American politics in the last 150 years as Black voting behavior. The centrality of federally administered civil rights protections has always governed partisan alignment for the overwhelming majority of the Black electorate. It used to be that the Republican Party carried this mantle, but since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Democrats have made addressing racial inequality a more prominent aspect of its platform. This, more than any other single factor, explains why 9 in 10 Black voters support Democratic congressional and presidential candidates for decades now. One result of this is what scholars call electoral capture. Remember, we talk about audience capture on this show. We're going to talk electoral capture. Listen to this. Defined in the 1998 paper by political scientist Paul Freimer and sociologist John David Sterinsky, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I'm not. Electoral capture occurs when a group of voters finds at least one of the major parties making little or no effort to appeal to their interests or attract their votes precisely because they perceive that group to be divisive. In a two-party system, these voters are left with only one viable option, and Freimer and Sterinsky, I'm probably still pronouncing it wrong, so I took a second stab at it, argue that the group is likely to find its support taken for granted and its interests neglected by the other major parties' leaders as well. Capture can work both ways. Not only can parties capture certain groups, but groups and movements can capture parties. We've seen that one. The Tea Party movement in 2010 successfully captured the Republican Party, ousting congressional leadership, and Trumpism has almost completely captured the party today, penalizing and ostracizing anyone who dare contest it. In the case of Black voters in today's Democratic Party, the capture is the product of three interrelated factors. Republican leadership views the prioritization of Black electorate central policy demand, strong federal civil rights protections, as harmful to standing within its heavily white base. Number two, as a result, to demonstrate alignment with its base, the party takes positions perceived to be resistant to the policies most desired by Black Americans. And three, listen to this one. The Democratic Party, while willing to deliver on some symbolic and expedient measures that appeal to Black voters, is not compelled to be as responsible to their demands it calculates to be more electorally costly, despite the Black electorate's partisan loyalty. We just watched that happen. We just saw, remember, Joe Biden, electorally DOA. His campaign was over, and then he went to South Carolina. Jim Clyburn put his arm around him, and the Black and African-American base of the Democratic Party ran, not walked, to the polls to support Joe Biden, along with a lot of more moderate and center-left Democrats, and the rest, as they say, is history. Like Johnson says in this piece, the Black Democratic voters are some of the most consistent in the country. Be very wary of people selling you something different than what they're doing without there being some kind of a paradigm shift to expedite that. Like he says in the piece, if you just write off people that you're not going to get their votes, you'll never get their votes. And those inroads can't be buzzwordy. There's Democratic candidates that found that out, that you can't just show up and get it just for being a Democrat. Looking at you, Pete Buttigieg, who, to his credit, has been working on it since, we're told. It's not automatic. No group is a monolith. And when it comes to African-American voters, they are very informed. They know exactly what's going on. They understand their history, and they understand the future they want to go to. And you better understand that as well if you go courting their votes, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. In other words, respect them and earn their vote, or you're not going to get it. That's the way we should be treating every people group. And we'll keep a close eye on this demographic going forward. More Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. All right, economics all over the headlines. We're going to go to our go-to on it, Jericho Hill. He works for one of them four-letter, not three-letter, I was corrected last time, four-letter government agencies, but his opinion are his and his alone unless they're correct, and then he really wants them to be his. Jericho Hill, how are you, my friend?
Doing pretty good today.
All right, let's try this real slow using small words for the folks from Logan and try to get through this one more time. Gas prices are a lagging indicator. Can you please explain why gas prices are a lagging indicator? Because we still seem to have problems understanding in the United States of America in the year of our Lord 2022, gas prices are a lagging indicator.
You should first specify they're a lagging indicator of what.
Darn you, Jericho. Right. Just answer the question.
Talk about economic conditions and whatnot. So the point that Andrew, you're trying to make is that what causes gas prices to rise, a lot of that's been set months or years in advance. And so, for example, if you make investments into more green energy technology, which takes several years to ramp up, those investments are not going to non-green to natural gas or to fossil fuels or stuff like that. So there's less capacity to ramp up. So when events happen, like what we've seen with COVID, there's an immediate sort of reaction. But then in terms of being able to accommodate that new that new demand, right? You have to change your production, and that takes time.
Now, it's the easiest thing in the world for me to just go, this current debate over gas prices and blame and Putin and Biden, this isn't hard. Like, gas prices were going up because we had a Democratic candidate who said, I'm going to end fossil fuels in America. That's going to have an effect. He has policies to that end. He wants more electric vehicles, so on and so forth. That's been his policy for a year. That affects gas prices in a lagging way. Some of the gas prices were already going up because of what happened before he came into office. Then Putin invades Ukraine. That raises the already high gas prices up. This does not seem that hard to me to have a delineation line of, okay, gas prices are Biden's fault up until this point, and then Putin made it worse from this point forward. Why can't we just discuss it that way? But no, we have to have a White House that says gas prices are all Putin's fault. And then the media goes nuts and go, no, they're all Biden's fault. There's this middle ground that we just skip over. Why do we do that?
We skip over it because nobody wants to talk about the nuance of the middle ground. It doesn't send out letters for fundraising. It doesn't get people to answer the robocalls for more funds, et cetera, and it doesn't get those angry letters that are sent in. I think that's part and parcel of why. I mean, and you're right. Look, we had a changeover in admin from friendly to fossil fuels to less friendly to fossil fuels. We had a pandemic that radically changed things. We had not just a response to trucks and tankers getting in, to get the gas and whatnot. But, now we've got a response from folks being like, well, I don't really, I need to commute more or I need to commute less. Some folks like myself don't even commute hardly anymore, which changes the calculus. But you're right. I find it hard to pin the blame 100% on a president for lots of things that happen, mainly because, if we think about it, right, COVID and a war, not really anything that anyone, right, could control, even the most darling of the right and the most darling of the left. So, those things happen. So then what are the responses? And I think I'm going to tee you up on the next part that I think you want to go into is, the Biden administration has recently come out and said, well, here's our new budget idea, our new package of spending and plans and whatnot. And this is going to help reduce the deficit. And this is going to help lower the inflation. And this is one of those where I'm going to go, yeah. If we accept certain assumptions that they're making about how the spending will work and how it will go fund things, that's very plausible. But it's also, but it works over years, right? It doesn't work over days, weeks, or months. So you can put all of these, you could say, let's be exceedingly charitable and let's say, yes, they're entirely right. We grant them that point. 5 years down the road, these investments that we're making are going to increase the productivity of our economy, handle supply chain issues, and lower the overall rate of inflation, right? Okay, but that's 5 years from today. That's not next year. That's not 6 months from now. They're not going to do a whole lot in the next 6 months. The next 6 months are entirely predicated on how we continue to sort of come out of the pandemic into a, quote, new normal, what happens in Europe. And to be fair, I think maybe some folks might not appreciate this, but as economists we do, it's not just the war disrupting, energy flow, out there in Europe right now. It's the fact that there's an extremely large amount of uncertainty in the market about what's going to happen 2 months, 3 months, 6 months from now that we didn't really have. And that uncertainty is a price premium, and we're all going to pay it.
Talking to Jericho Hill, our economist friend. Okay, define uncertainty then, because people don't seem, I have trouble getting my head around this too. We see things physically happening in the news, Ukraine, natural disasters, policies like pipelines being canceled, pipelines being approved, Nord Stream, Keystone. We can get our head around all that stuff. But the way markets work and the way the global economy work is the real decision makers and shot callers, they're trying to guess what's going to happen ahead of time. And when things like this happen, they don't know what's going to happen. That creates uncertainty. And that's almost as damaging in and of itself as whatever the breaking headline news is, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just say you're a widget maker, right? And you're looking at an uncertain economic time or your uncertainty has increased. You don't know if the economy is going to be booming more or we're going to go into a recession. And you're responsible for making widgets for a bunch of folks. So now you've got to adjust your forecast of how many widgets you need to produce for that uncertainty. That's the fundamental problem. And, it's something that we all deal with, but that's, getting beyond just the what you might say, the rich people making, bets of what things are going to be like 6 months from now. I mean, just down to more brass tacks. If you're trying to plan for what you need, if you're a business and you're trying to figure out what do I need to have in stock 3 months from now, well, the war changes things a little bit. That's part of the uncertainty that we maybe don't appreciate.
Yeah, talking to Jericho Hill. Let's talk about something that economists have to deal in numbers. They have to deal in facts. They can't deal in unknown unknowns and known unknowns, as Rumsfeld famously said.
Sometimes we try and fail.
Yeah, it's a great line, though. What about an economy like the UK? And I know you're an American economist, but where they've tolerated Russian money to a huge extent. There's just a river of oligarch money going through London. Of course, London's a financial center for the entire world. We've seen where Deutsche Bank, basically flat out refuses to even look at all their Russian money that goes through them. There's a lot of economy and a lot of the world economy that is unseen because it's just not tracked properly because it's designed to be that way. And when that gets interrupted, it starts showing up in the things that we do track. How does economists deal with that? Because that's a great unknown. It's kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody knows it's there. But now we know for a fact it's getting disrupted, especially in England when you see like Abramovich is losing Chelsea and things like that. They can't hide it now. How do you adjust that into when you're looking at economic stuff?
Well, for an economy such as like Great Britain or from the U.S., for the most part, if one foreign country withdraws a substantial amount of inflow, for whatever reason, it's unlikely to feel more than just maybe a speed bump when you're going a little bit too fast because those economies are so big, right? What I think is more difficult to sort of figure out is exactly where the money is, and I want to pivot to talking about yachts. So, lots of commentators were like, let's just seize all the Russian yachts. Let's seize all the oligarch yachts, right? Punish them. And of course, we know some of those yachts. Like we know who owns them. A couple of them have been seized. But so many of these sort of high-end ticket items, such as super yachts, are owned through shell companies, through management companies, in a pretty obscured ownership structure. So how do you really figure out exactly how much Russian money is in the British economy or the U.S. economy when certainly yachts are not the only thing that these complicated business arrangements are done.
Yeah, talking to Jericho Hill, our economist friend, we're going to break down some of those economic sanctions, what's opposed, what actually bites, what matters, what doesn't, what's noise. Also talk a little bit more about the overall economic conditions. Our friend Jericho Hill, making economic things so easy to understand, even I can understand them when we come back on Heard Tell. Our friend Jericho Hill's joining us here on Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you for joining us. Of course, the ethos of an economist is bad times don't last, but bad economics always last. That's a Scott Hall reference who passed away. We'll talk a little wrestling at the end.
I very much appreciated that reference.
There you go. Rest in peace, Scott Hall. But talking about some bad guys here, we were just talking about the dirty money, the oligarch money. Talk about, because you're an economist, but you're also a sports fan, you keep up with the culture. Explain to folks the ultra wealthy, things like a sports team, like a Chelsea, things like a yacht. Those aren't just token toys. Those are also ways of parking money when you basically have no way to park massive amounts of money any other way to do it. And you got to put it somewhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, art is another great example of a way to park money. But certainly, so of course, some of the folks that invest in sports teams do a very good job of increasing that investment and treating it like a business, and others it is simply just as you said, a money dump. There's I think this might be less of an issue for most American sports leagues, but certainly soccer throughout the world is a sort of well-known dumping ground for some of this. Real estate is another dumping ground. Lots of there's also lots of obfuscated real estate holdings. So at the very high end, it doesn't affect the average person when trying to buy a house. People don't buy homes that are hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Unless you're filthy rich. But who exactly holds those very high end real estate homes? Is another thing where you may not necessarily know who actually owns that house. But it's there to park money. It's a diversification strategy. Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang Financial. Talking to Jericho Hill, master of many things, but mostly economic things. Okay. When we have an uncertainty like the Ukraine situation, this looks like it's going to be at least a semi-protracted war, at least through the summer, probably at the very least. How does the market start to adjust? Because they can't just keep bouncing out of fear and uncertainty. They're going to settle on something, especially if this starts looking like it's going to go for a while. Because remember, before this, we thought we pretty much had this summer economically figured out. The Fed's going to raise interest rates 3 or 4 times. We're going to have an election year, so they're going to jimmy the money. We're going to have another stimulus package so they can run on that.
We were going to get inflation under control.
Yeah,
everything looked great.
We thought we had this year under control. Look, at some point though, the powers that be are going to make a decision on what path to take. How do you think that shakes out here in the near term, probably over the next 2-3 months?
I think I first have to say there's a lot of personal bias here about that path because I apparently have more than a quarter of Ukrainian blood in me. So I have a little bit of a loyalty, sympathy here. I don't see this conflict ending nicely. I don't see it ending a whole lot anytime soon. It's going to cost Russia quite a bit. Their economy is already, quite hurting. You can watch the ruble essentially do a roller coaster free fall. And you can watch videos now of folks fighting for stuff in grocery stores, which is reminiscent of another time when Russia used to be called the Soviet Union. Now, how it all, I wish I could say how it would all shake out. I don't know what the military situation is going to look like. I certainly have, hopes that some Ukrainian solution is found to the benefit of the Ukrainian people. I feel badly for them, and have been doing what I can to support the Ukrainian Red Cross and other such organizations that desperately need help. But think about Europe now, and this like in the short run. Let's be a little more optimistic. In the short run, Europe is going to suffer from pretty high heating bills and energy prices too, because they're shutting down a lot of the oil and gas investments they were doing, and now you've got Germany saying, "Oops, maybe we don't want to shut down the nuclear power plants that we were planning on doing. Maybe the best thing to be green is to actually build more nuclear power plants." I think that would be a really, really good change.
Yeah, I've kind of, we love our analogies here. I've taken to calling it like Jules Verne. He got an astonishing amount of things right on Journey to the Moon. That 3 guys on a couch. We put 3 guys on a couch in a capsule. He used a projectile. It was a capsule. They had to he got a lot of stuff really right. The problem was we needed to wait 84 years to NASA to figure out the really important stuff like, hey, let's not use a cannon. Let's build a Saturn V and get it up into low Earth orbit. I think that's where we're at with some of the energy stuff right now, where we can see the solution. We've figured out kind of the big picture part. Okay, this is possible, and here's how we do it. But there's a whole lot of people that are still in the science fiction realm of, oh, we'll just put them in a cannon and shoot them up there. And that's how they're kind of dealing with this energy crisis stuff. That's not how the world works. We can see it, but we're still 40, 50, 60 years, whatever, maybe sooner with technology, from really changing how energy, especially geopolitical energy and how practical energy for the poorer folks in the world are. Am I wrong in using that kind of analogy of like people can see it and then things like Putin kind of bring it back and focus like, okay, we're not as close as we are?
I think Putin's action might have accelerated that timeline a little bit for the Western world. Now, yeah, I think you're right. And when we just talked about substituting, coal power plants for instead of and use nuclear power plants instead, right? And seeing maybe there'll be a lack of environmental activism against nuclear power plants now going forward, particularly in Europe. Although nuclear power has been pretty stalled here in the U.S. as well, which is unfortunate. As an aside, right, I used to work for a power company, so I like to think I know one or two things about power generation. So I'm going to bring some of that knowledge here. Even if we today could build, 100 nuclear power plants, and we actually had a site to put them, the distribution of that power is yet another complication, and our energy grid still desperately needs repairs. It needs upgrading. You would need a lot of more additional substations. You need some, substation infrastructure upgrades. I don't know what you do about the Texas power grid. That thing's a mess. So just think about all those moving parts. We are still a long ways away from being able to move our economy off of oil and coal.
And this is what frustrates me about it is because we've had this technology for 50 years, 60 years. If we would have done this 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. And that's the part I never hear anybody talk about is like economically, energy-wise, clean-wise, if we hadn't done all this silly moratorium stuff and kind of shot ourselves in the foot, we would be in a completely different place right now. Folks don't want to talk about that piece of it of, hey, we kind of dropped the ball on some of this if we would have just done it back then. I know the technology's gotten a little better. I know 3 Mile Island. I know Chernobyl. But, I mean, God, Chernobyl was 40 years ago. You don't think our technology is better? Well, and we now know Chernobyl was not a nuclear accident. It was a bureaucratic accident.
Yeah, and also with 3 Mile Island was actually a success story in the sense that
exactly right.
It happened and all of our safeguards worked. And that's the point of a safeguard. Also keep in mind that, this is economics, right? People respond to incentives. Price is an incentive, right? So we have long enjoyed in the US very cheap energy. So the political pressure to move off of that, to make investments that are costly up front, that are cheaper in the long run, but are costly up front, there's not the political will to do that. Much like, and that's part of, I think, to call back to earlier, that's part of the problem the Biden administration faces when they're arguing, hey, our spending plan that we're putting forward is going to help lower inflation and reduce the budget deficit. Because if we take them at face value and agree with their assumptions and agree that that's what happens, it still is an effect that happens over time. And voters are not going to be voting on a policy that's going to help them in 10 years when they're wanting help in 6 months.
Yeah, we're talking to our friend Jericho Hill, an economist. We're going to continue with him right after this as Heard Tell continues. Is it going to be 6 months, though? Because this feels like something that's going to have kind of an immediate, an intermediate, and a long-term effect.
Oh, I was just picking 6 months as an example. Like 6 months from now, we're going to be having an election, right? You might have all the best policies in the world, but guess what? If you're not helping people when they're wanting to walk into the poll booth, like you can go back and you can see, think about, how, like when we've seen changeovers in admin, particularly partisan changeovers in admin, it's always been related to some sort of crisis, which somewhat was the fault of the prior admin. And some of that was actually just how the world works, and stuff outside of their control. It's akin to a ship captain basically running into a storm, which the ship captain could not control. And then the ship captain makes the wrong decision when they get into the storm, and some folks get hurt.
Well, the people that get hurt on this stuff, though, I'm talking to Jericho Hill, economist, 4-letter organization dweller. My friend, the people that get hurt on this stuff, and you know this well because you focus a lot on housing and things like this. The problem with this is we talk about it online, and the policy people have these great ideas about, oh, we're going to fix the energy problem. We're going to fix fuel prices. But it's the poorer folks, and it's the underprivileged folks, and it's the working class folks that are going to really get whacked hard on all these policies. We talked about it with the EVs online. We're like, yeah, Secretary Buttigieg, you can tell everybody to go buy a $50,000 car, but that's not in a lot of people's budget. If they can't afford $5 gas, they're not going to go buy a $50,000 car to save $2 on gas. That's not how that works.
No, they're going to have to buy an overly priced used car at this point,
which you can't get right now. Something you've been talking about on and on. The used car prices are 20% over sticker right now. I think
we're starting to see a slight improvement. It's starting, but then of course this Ukraine thing happened, and
But you've talked about the inflation was driven by things like used car and gas prices.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that affect working class people and below. It doesn't affect the commuter class quite as much. And I don't mean the commuter classes mean people commuting. I'm talking about people that have the option of whether to go into work or not. No offense.
Yeah. The home-based option. Yeah. Well, look, I think I've beat that drum a few times, talking about how I'm in a very privileged position, and I recognize that. So yes, a lot of this hurts folks who are at the what we call lower to moderate income spectrum. These are folks that have to drive their kids to school. These are folks that have to drive to work. These are folks that work as, hey, the maids that come and clean houses. How do they get to those houses? They got to drive, So, how do those what can we do to help those folks? Is really when I think about policy, what we should be doing. And, a lot of this is, I'm going to go back and do, what has been a pretty left-leaning policy thing of cancel all student debt. And for me, thinking about it practically, that would pretty much be what we call a regressive tax in a sense. It would benefit mid and upper income earners much more than it would benefit lower income earners. I think, tailoring sort of our approach is important. And so in the student loan case, it's saying, I've been talking on Twitter and trying to talk to some policymakers like, cancel student loan debt for folks that tried to go to school and didn't complete and haven't completed for a long freaking time, right? So something happened. Those are folks that are probably not making a lot of money. That student loan debt is probably hampering their ability to move to a maybe better or safer apartment, to get a better or safer car, to be in a better or safer school. That's sort of what we should do. If you're making $100,000 a year and you still have $50,000 from an English degree debt, I don't know what to say.
I could see. I'm not against the concept, I guess. I'm very much against the application of how they're talking about doing it, because there's better ways. You're just going to wipe it off the books, and then the predatory lending situation that is the student debt economy, and that's what it is. It's an industry in and of itself. It's going to make it worse. It's going to perpetuate it.
It doesn't get fixed because you don't fix the incentives.
No, because they're just going to crank up tuition more. The education bubble, instead of popping and readjusting, which is what needs to happen, as painful as that's going to be, it's just going to expand now because you just wiped off one of the indicators that's going to make it go.
Listen, I think you can tailor. I mean, you can tailor it to actually help people that still really need it. Let's keep in mind, we're still dealing with a K-shaped economic recovery. What is a K-shaped economic recovery? Folks like myself, our earnings have probably even kept pace or outstripped inflation. We've certainly brought down our costs, right? I don't commute anymore, so I don't have transportation costs anymore. I don't eat out, so my food costs got a lot lower. Even if food costs rise, I don't eat out, so that's cheaper. And so that's been good times for folks like me, and for folks that are lower down on the economic spectrum. Their unemployment rate is still elevated. They, are starting to see opportunities to move, and to get better jobs, but the fact is those jobs are just now starting to pop up. And those jobs might not be in the places that these folks are. And so, and then they have to deal with, as you said, higher energy costs. They have to deal, with higher food costs, right? We haven't even talked about the fact that, hey, does anybody remember that Ukraine is basically the wheat capital of the whole world? And I know we've been very American-centric, but you know who consumes all the Ukrainian wheat? It's Africa. And so we're staring at a famine potentially in Africa. And we're not even talking about that.
Yeah, African Pivot 3.0 or whatever we're on now. Jericho Hill, our good friend, economist, covering a lot of ground. Jericho Hill, let folks know where they can follow you, your social media. You've also got an excellent little newsletter going that deals with housing. Recommend people check out. Let folks know where they can find you, my friend.
Thanks for the reminder, because it's middle of the month, so I need to go update my newsletter, which is jerichohill.substack.com. It's called Quigleyand, which is named after John Quigley, a very famous and dead housing economist, someone that did a lot of good for helping us understand housing econ. Just to keep people wondering. You can find me on Twitter at Motoeconomist, and you can seemingly find me on Heard Tell on a semi-regular basis. And you'll get me to talk if you mention wrestling.
Yeah, we need to do a new wrestling one sometime soon, because I got a lot of thoughts about what's going on with that stuff right now. But
I for folks that maybe didn't know the reference, I just want to explain it. So Scott Hall was a wrestler. One of the most important things about Scott Hall was that when wrestling was in its greatest heyday in the mid to late 90s, Scott Hall and another wrestler named Kevin Nash jumped ship from the top dog WWE promotion to the WCW Southern promotion with Ted Turner, and basically jump-started a ratings bonanza where wrestling was actually cool, and you could wear wrestling T-shirts out in public and feel like you were actually cool for about 2 to 3 years. So he was a pivotal part of that. That was probably one of the biggest moments in the wrestling industry. He, though, had a lot of personal demons. He had a lot of personal issues. He basically turned into a drunk and just a drug addict and an awful person. And then at the last moment reached out and got help from a former wrestler turned yoga coach, Diamond Dallas Page, who's actually legit, and got him fixed up 10 years ago, got him sober, 10 years sober, and got him to the point that he could go back out there and meet the fans, participate, be backstage, even get inducted into a Hall of Fame. And so while a lot of us are very saddened, that he's passed on, we were talking earlier, and I said, I'm really glad that, he got to end his career on a high note where he was able to be back and contributing and be a great, role model at this point, and get to basically have his curtain call that, everyone we hope gets to have, because more often than not in professional wrestling, that's not the curtain call that pro wrestlers get.
Yep. And curtain call was a sly inside reference too that I got and a few others will get. Scott Hall, we should say he died complications from surgery. It wasn't something untoward. It wasn't unfortunately, too many wrestlers, bad things happen. He had a heart attack and then had a series of heart attacks, complications from surgery. He was 62 years old, but I'm glad he got the redemption story. All right, buddy, we'll get around to talking just wrestling one of these days. Thank you for your time on economics today, though, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. Have a great day.
Hey, we're glad you're in heavy rotation. Appreciate it. Welcome back to Heard Tell. We end on a happy note or an uplifting note. This is a little bit of a melancholy note, but I want to highlight who's involved here. Albany Democrat and Chronicle, democratandchronicle.com. They have a long piece on caregivers and how caregivers need support and caregivers need some programs and some assistance from both government and private organizations for elderly care and disabled patients and the chronically ill. That's all good things. What makes this story unique, and while we're highlighting it in our end of the show segment where we uplift things, it's who these caregivers are. Young people. So when people complain about how young people are damaged or this generation is this and that, remember this stat. It is estimated, this is the Democrat and Chronicle, it is estimated that 5.4 million young people in the U.S. are caring for someone in their home, a number that researchers believe is greatly underestimated. They assist in the care for disabled parents, chronically ill siblings, elderly relatives, and their challenges and expenses vary. Some studies suggest they may have increased anxiety and depression, and for most, resources are hard to find. They have an extended sense of isolation. They have an extended sense of need. Oftentimes, they are not equipped or have training formally for the things they are doing. So what they're trying to do is partner with schools to reach teens who provide care. But I want to go down to the bottom of this piece, and this is where it gets uplifting, even though this is a piece about the struggles and trials they go through. Cara Levine, who is a home health care advocate and has championed the support of youth caregivers for nearly 2 decades, listen to this quote, they don't want to talk about it, and they don't get the support from their peers, which could be a good source of support if everyone understood why you can't hang out for that day. Remember, we're talking about teens, young people. When it comes to supporting caregivers, Levine said the focus has primarily been on the adults because some families don't disclose what their children are doing in fear that it would be taken out of their home or otherwise punished. But she said that's not the answer. Quote, the answer is to provide enough support in the home that the young person can contribute in a meaningful way, but not be responsible for the whole thing. She added that the COVID-19 pandemic and the opioid crisis has increased the number of youth caregivers and the need to pay attention to them. What do we say on this program often? You can't, with one hand, complain about a generation that is stuck in perpetual adolescence or isn't becoming adults fast enough or isn't as mature as previous generation was. And with the other hand, infantilize them and hold them down and push them back and tell them that they can't do this, that, or the other. Normalizing these routines of young caregivers. No, we don't want anybody to be exploited. They should be carefully checked for that sort of situation. But youth caregivers and family dynamics, this is how it's always been since there was more than one human needing to take care of another one. And it makes all the sense in the world to formalize it, get it out of the shadows, and make sure they have the support they need, and we can accurately account for them. If nothing else, we should be able to praise them. People taking care of their own family and friends in their communities, that's always worthwhile. I can think of very few things young people could do that can make a difference more than that. That'll do it for Heard Tell. Thank you so much for watching or listening, whether it's on the YouTube channel, the Big Talker Network's Facebook page. Those are where you can watch each and every episode we do. Or if you're listening on any of the podcasting platforms, please make sure you subscribe. Important for a couple of reasons. One is you won't miss anything we have going on. Number two is you can keep track of what we're doing, and we can see what you're doing, what you're responding to, what you're listening, what you're downloading, and we can make adjustments. Also, there's ratings and review tabs. Make sure you use those. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you feel. You want to contact us directly, heardtellshow@gmail.com, heardtellshow on the Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. We've done segments based off of what you've asked us to cover or look into, and we'd be happy to do it again. So just one more time, thank you so much. We keep getting growth, and it's because of folks like you. Sure appreciate it. So wherever you are, across the street or around the world, we hope you and yours are well. We hope you are well fed. We'll talk to you tomorrow for more Heard Tell.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.